Well, welcome back to Brew and Ink. This is an Interbrew episode where we are going to interview Alyssa. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I am doing really well. How have you been with COVID? Are things opening up where you are?
Things are definitely opening up. Luckily, I work remotely and work from home, so COVID hasn't changed my job situation as much as it might have. But got my second vaccine a couple of weeks ago, so things are opening back up, and I'm excited to be out there. Went to the zoo last week, so it's nice.
Yeah. So remind me where you are. You're Midwest? No, am I right? Where are you?
Yes. So I moved to Indianapolis last year. So
that's right. I remember now. I thought I had the right area. And just to kind of give people a quick sort of snapshot of who Alyssa Roat is, why don't you tell them what you do?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm the publicity manager at publisher Mountain Brook Inc. And our speculative fiction imprint, Mountain Brook Fire. So I do all the publicity stuff there, and then also some of the editing, acquisitions, that sort of thing. And when I'm not doing that, I'm doing a lot of freelance writing and editing, and I'm a YA and adult author. So lots of books coming out this year, next year, year after that.
Yeah, and you got a book coming out next month, which we'll get to. How many books you got coming out this year?
There are 3 this year.
There are 3 this year. And you said you got 3 next year, or you and Hope have 3, or just you have 3 combined with Hope, or whatever?
I have 3. Some of them are with Hope, some are not. So Hope and I are finished with our YA superhero romance duology. And now we have an adult romance series, and then I have my fantasy series. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah. And for those people who don't know, Hope Bollinger, am I saying it right?
Mm-hmm.
Is another author, and she's an editor, and she works in publishing. And she was a big part of the Serious Writer group that we've interviewed several people from that sort of community. Over the last few years, that them and Realm Makers seem to be a lot of where we get some interviews. And so you're going to be Realm Makers this year, right?
I am. I'll be there representing Mountain Brook. So
Mountain Brook. Oh, so you're going to be there. Oh, that's right. I did see that. You're going to be there as an not an editor. I mean, as an editor.
Yeah,
right?
Acquisitions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my daughter's going to be there, and I told you that. So she's signed up for the teen track, and she is very, very excited. She's 13 years old, and she is very excited. So I just asked her in January. I said, "Do you want to go with me to this, amazing, awesome writing conference?" And she was like, "Absolutely." And so Kyle's going to be there, and Alan Arnold. Do you know Alan?
I don't think I do.
Yeah. So Alan, we'll have to make sure you meet him. Alan's going to be there. I mean, there's so many people that I know are going to be there. I don't even know if I'm going to go to classes. It's just going to be cool to just be with people. So anyway, so we'll see you there. So we're going to talk a little bit about world building today, and I'm just going to take advantage of Alyssa here because she is a published author multiple times, as you guys have heard. And we are getting into season 7 of our podcast. And once we choose the story, so that's where we are. You don't know that, Alyssa, but we're choosing the story, and the audience is going to choose which story we tell. But once that happens, we're going to need to build out our story. We're going to need to build out the characters. We're going to need to build out the setting and the world and all of that sort of thing. So let me just ask you this question really first. Do you think world building is important to do before you start writing, or do you write it, or do you do world building while you are writing?
That's interesting. I think it depends on the writer. I wouldn't say that you have to have everything figured out in your world right away. But definitely once you're going back through those edits, making sure that everything is consistent. So for me personally, when I'm co-writing with Hope, we very much have an outline, have a plan, because there's two of us. We have to be a little more consistent. But when it's just me writing, I tend to be more of a pantser, where I have some general ideas and then I start writing. So I may not necessarily have the world completely thought out right at the beginning, but probably about by 3/4 of the way through the first book, I have spent a lot of time really thinking about, okay, how exactly does everything work in this world? And going back and changing things if I need to fit that so it's consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that any writer would say they have it 100% done, right? I mean, you're always going to come up as you're writing, even those of us who do a lot of outlining. I don't do a lot, but even people who might do a lot of outlining, you're going to come up with things you didn't think about, right? A character or a tavern or something. And you're always going to come up with some things that you're going to have to sort of build on the fly. And so how important do you think world building is? It's obviously really important, but why do you think world building is so important as you're getting into your story? Like what makes it so important as you and Hope especially are getting into a story? Why do you have to do a lot of that ahead of time?
I'm a bit of a world building nerd, so I love getting into things that will probably never show up in the book. But I think world building is important because the world that you live in shapes so many things about you, shapes how you think about the world, how you interact with the world, and it's even going to shape a lot of the plot. So things that might be issues 100 years ago are not going to be issues now, vice versa. So kind of everything in your story, how your characters act, what they think, what they're doing is all going to be influenced by what type of world they're living in.
Yeah. The best way that I have to think about it when I do world building is that your world is another character. Like you wouldn't just have some character show up and have no idea where they come from, no idea. I mean, I guess people do that, but that character doesn't really make as much of an impact on the page if you don't have some idea of their motivation and what they're about and some of their backstory. And so just like with any character, I probably go over all sorts of things in their history and backstory that will never come up in the page, but it gives me a good sense of the character so that when they may have reactions and those sort of things. And so that's been one of the best things that I do. At least I don't know if it's a trick or whatever, but when I build a world, I want to make sure it's got character. Like, what is its character? Like, what is it good at? What are its flaws and all those sort of things, and kind of build from those sort of ideas. Because like you're saying, the world is going to react to whatever your character does, just like other characters react, and you got to know what you're doing. Sure. What are some of your favorite parts to kind of build out in a world? Like you say, you're a geek about it. Is it everything, or are there some parts that you like the most?
Yes. Well, when I was a teenager, first, foraying into world building and writing, and none of those will probably ever see the light of day. But one thing that I loved to do, even when I was just playing pretend with my sister, was I would draw very intricate maps. And so I would be very concerned with the different biomes, how it all worked out. So I'd be like, okay, these people live by the coastline and they get their income from this. And then these people live in the mountains and the water from the mountains goes here. And so these people live along the river. And if you have a world that you've drawn and thought out, a lot of times stories just come out of that because you realize, oh, well, if somebody is now controlling the river between the mountain people and the coastline people, they can interrupt trade and there might be a war about it, or all sorts of different things can come up just from thinking about what the world might be like. Or I also really love magic systems and trying to think of unique ways of how magic works. sometimes I drive myself a little bit crazy with trying to make everything perfect and everything make perfect sense and be completely consistent. But if there are rules to your magic, that's also going to cause conflicts and problems. And if something needs to be done in your story, but for some reason magic is preventing it or causing it, then there's another plot line right there for you. So I think that's what I really love about world building, is coming up with things that then spark conflicts, plots, ideas, characters.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that it's really, I would think it would be difficult not to know, again, the cities or the regions, or not to know those things if your character is going to be moving around in that world, because like you're saying, it just naturally, conflict sort of issues come up naturally when you're dealing with that. Are you a Brandon Sanderson fan at all?
I am ashamed to admit this, but I have not yet read Brandon Sanderson books. It is on my TBR, and I obviously can't possibly be a true fantasy fan. But no,
that's not true. You can be a true fantasy fan, and now Lord of the Rings, maybe like that could maybe be. You could maybe make that argument. You've read Lord of the Rings, obviously.
Oh,
right?
Of course. Right.
Now, that one maybe. I think Brandon Sanderson is in sort of that second tier where there's several in that second tier that you probably got to like at least one of them, maybe to be a real. Yeah, I'm just asking that because I am a huge Sanderson fan, and he really was a big pioneer to change over those sort of ideas of magic systems. And he wasn't the only one, but he was one of those guys. What's an example of a magic system that you've created? I mean, no spoiler alerts, but maybe a book that's already come out or something where you've had to come up with those sort of rules for a magic system or whatever.
For sure. Well, I guess I can it's not necessarily spoilers, but for the book that's coming out in July, Wraithwood, I spent an inordinate amount of time on the magic system and the history of the magic system and how it came to be. It is kind of a wizardry-based magic system. There are people who are wizards, and the different wizards have different types of abilities. So one thing you really have to think about in magic systems is, what are the limits? Because if anybody can wield magic and just say, okay, now I can make cake appear, or I could just, kill this army right now because I have magic, it kind of kills any sort of plot or conflict. So you have to think about, okay, what are the checks and balances? Like who has what weakness, who has what strengths? So that's something I had to think about a lot when assigning them different types of powers is, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each power? And then just how do people get the powers? How is it? I have to admit that when I was first doing it to figure out how certain people would get magical powers, since in the story it's hereditary, I was definitely making punnet squares. I don't know how exactly you say it, but with the different genes. So I'm like, okay, if they had these parents and these parents, how would they? None of that's going to show up in the story, but I had to know for my own sanity.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, and as an author, I've had a few of these. I haven't had a ton of these, but I can imagine you've had these sort of readers who they figure out, they read way into details. Like, I'm not that kind of reader. Like, I don't read a Brandon Sanderson book, and if it doesn't all work out perfectly in the system or whatever, I don't get upset, right? But there are some people who read a book that I will write, and if it doesn't all, like, if they can't figure out the rules, if they can't figure out like how it all works together, like, they'll tell you. They'll be like, I don't get this, like, especially nowadays. Like I'm saying, like a lot of modern readers expect that, I think, a little bit more. Did you have to come up with like a world building sort of like magic system, sort of? It wouldn't be magic system, but I know you have some great books, Dear Hero and Dear Henchman. Did you have kind of a magic system that was more like superhero magic sort of stuff?
There's definitely a speculative system, I guess you might call it. Dear Hero and Dear Henchman are meant to be a lot more, they're funny, they're rom-com, they don't take themselves seriously, so we didn't have to adhere as closely as I might in a more serious, not necessarily serious, but not meant to be humorous book like Wraithwood. But in Hero and Henchman, you definitely have to think about who has what sort of superhero power, and you can't make one person too overpowered because then they're going to wipe out everybody else. There has to be strengths and weaknesses. And for example, our hero Cortex, his weakness is granite, which is really silly because it's a silly book. But if something is coated in granite, he can no longer like read minds through it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And for those of you who are listening, Dear Hero and Dear Henchman are very creative books. And I've read Dear Hero. I haven't read Henchman yet, but they're very creative in that it's basically like a series of messages. Like, I don't know if it's technically text messages, but they're kind of like that sort of messages between a hero and a villain, right? Like they're trying to, one's trying to find the other. They're trying to, and it's very creative, and I wouldn't say silly, but it's very kind of tongue in cheek. A little bit of a different sort of spin on the whole superhero tropes and those sort of things. So I really like it. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. When you're doing like more world building, what do you think is important to start with? So like when you go into a setting for like Wraithwood or the Dear Hero or any of these other books where you have to kind of come up with this new sort of creative world, where do you start? Like, what do you have to start with?
Right. Well, Wraithwood was interesting because I had been working a lot of more high concept ideas of big fantasy worlds and battles and all that sort of thing. And then I was like, okay, I'm getting a little tired out from it. I'm just going to write a really cozy little story about a girl who goes to this, country mansion, and there's this whimsical magic, and that worked for all of a few chapters, and then suddenly I had a trilogy and a big magic system and all sorts of things going on. So that one I kind of started with an aesthetic, I guess, of I wanted it to be slightly creepy but slightly whimsical, just sort of like a gothic sort of feeling. And then I figured out around that, okay, what's going to give that sort of mysterious feeling? Why is there going to be that sort of mystery? What sort of magic system and world building do I need to do to make all of this happen? Whereas, for Dear Hero, we started out with the major concept itself of what if heroes and villains were more like social media influencers and they could meet each other on nemesis apps that are like dating apps, but for fighting each other. So I think it just depends on how you approach it. But if you're doing world building first, I'd say probably the big picture of like, what is your main concept? But if you have specific ideas, like my idea of some sort of mysterious mansion with magic, just figuring out what sort of systems and worlds are going to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of times when I've taught world building, and I've tried to let people know that even when you're putting a story in a world that exists, there's still world building. I mean, you may not be creating it, but there's still an element of like, if I'm going to write the story and it's going to be in Savannah, like if I've never been to Savannah and I don't know anything about Savannah, Georgia, right? Like it's probably not going to come across very well, or it's not going to be a very good character and all that sort of thing. Do you have any stories like that where it's kind of in a world that already exists, or a city or a town or something like that, where you had to make that real world sort of area a character in their story sort of thing?
Oh, yeah. So interestingly, as much as I love high fantasy, talking about high fantasy, writing high fantasy worlds, none of my published stuff is high fantasy. It's all kind of set in our world or our world adjacent. So, for example, in Dear Hero, we did base almost everything on real places. that either one or both of us had been to. So if it was an Arizona scene, Hope's never been to Arizona. So she's like, okay, I'm deferring to you. If I write something and you're like, no, that's not how it actually is, like you change it. And with Wraithwood, I at first I didn't really know where I was setting it. I was like somewhere foresty in America. But then I spent a lot of time in upstate New York and decided, okay, yes, this is where I'm going to set it. But before then, I was like, how do I describe trees? Because I was from Arizona. We didn't have trees. We had cactus. So I was just like, okay, trees are just, I don't know, there's trees. And then I went there and I realized, oh, there's a lot of like ferns and underbrush and all sorts of other things that go into this sort of setting. It rains a lot, which I didn't really think about. So I think kind of, even if I can, either I need to find someone who's been there and say, hey, can you check me? Or I need to go somewhere if it's in the real world before I feel like I can really write about it well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm the same way. There are some stories that I haven't really tried to tackle because I haven't been to Paris. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like I would love for this to happen in Europe, but I've never actually been there. The closest I'll get is like, well, I'll just make up a town in like southern Italy or something. I'll just make something up and make up it's still world building, and you still have to know something. And I was a social studies major, and I was a social studies teacher for several years. So I geek out on the world building too. So I really geek out on like, what's the economy? What's the money system? What's the this like? And so my problem is, especially with my first book, my editor was like, why are you explaining so many things? And I'm like, oh, you don't have to explain things, right? That's why you do the world building, is the names of them. And as long as people aren't confused, right, you don't really have to explain that this is the money system or this is the whatever, whatever.
Right.
You don't have to give me you don't have to give the reader the whole history of the city, right? You can just, but it gives it that sort of character part of it. Why is the name of the book Wraithwood? I really like the title of that book. I think that's a really cool title. What does Wraithwood mean? What's that about?
Right. So this book takes place at Wraithwood Estate, is the name of the place where the main character, she's a teen girl, just finished her freshman year of high school, and her parents are going off overseas to help her sister who's like working with refugees. And they say, hey, you're too young to come with us. You're going to go stay with your uncle, who you did not know that you had. And he lives in this kind of secluded manor in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York. And it's called Wraithwood. And there's a lot of reasons for the name Wraithwood, but those would be spoilers. So...
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And was this just one of a lot of ideas that you've had and you just kind of developed this one? So I think one of the things that interests me with myself and with other authors, and I like to talk to them, I know I have a billion ideas for stories. I don't know about you. Like I'm not hurting for ideas, like sometimes people will come up to me and they're like, hey, I've got a great idea for a story. Anybody ever do that to you? Like
all the time. Well, especially when I was an agent.
oh, sure. But like as if you should write it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like people come up to me and they're like, you should write this book. Like I need more ideas. I do not need more ideas. Like what I need is help narrowing down what to work on, right?
Definitely.
Like what do I give my time? So how do you do that? How do you sift through ideas that you have and say, no, this is one I think is really good, or I'm really passionate about? I mean, we're passionate about all our ideas, but like how do you pick your idea to work on?
I think it's a combination of factors. One of them is I have lots of ideas, but not necessarily all of them are fleshed out very much. So a lot of ideas, sometimes you just need to like get them out of your head. Otherwise you'll, keep thinking about them and not think about the project you should be working on. So I have plenty of documents that are just like 10 to 20 pages of me writing like the beginning of an idea. And then I get that far and I'm like, you know what? I really don't have anything else for this. I don't really have anywhere to go with this, but now I know that because I've tried it. So I think it's just thinking about which ones do I actually have material for. Another thing now is what's marketable and what has and hasn't been done.
Right.
So, as sad as that sounds, that I'm not saying like, oh, it's about what truly inspires me. A lot of it working in the industry is, looking and seeing where are there gaps, where are there things that the industry is looking for right now, and then looking at my ideas and seeing, okay, which of those kind of fit that more. Those are the ones I'll focus on.
Yeah. So a couple things that I do that I found over the years, because I think in the beginning, I was always worried, like if I didn't work on this idea right away, I would miss it, because I don't know if this ever happened to you. I think it happens to everybody. But like you have an idea and then like a year later, someone else, like you see it, like it's come out as a book or something, like someone else has had that exact same idea. And you're like, man, if I had only just jumped on it 2 years ago or something, does that ever happen to you?
Oh, for sure. There's some sort of weird invisible hand effect that seems to happen where people all come up with the same idea at the same time. And then some people publish it and some people don't. And then you sit there and you're like, I had that idea 2 years ago too. I just didn't write it.
Exactly. So I think in the beginning I was like, man, if I don't jump on an idea, that could have been the one, or what, you have all these kind of weird, but I think something that I have had to learn is number one, that I'm always going to have more ideas. Like I don't have to worry about an idea, someone else taking it, because I'll have other ideas. Number one. And number two is something that I found in the last 3 or 4 years, especially, is that some ideas that I've kind of given up on come back. Like it just wasn't the time yet. Like I had an idea and I was passionate about it, but it just felt like you're saying, like it's not real. It's not a whole thing yet. And sometimes the idea comes up again, and someone's like, "No, we're going to do that," and you're like, "Oh, I just had this throwaway idea I had 5 years ago or something." And so sometimes I think I know you're a person of faith, as am I, and I really do think sometimes it's a timing issue. Sometimes it's like, no, this is the time for this, right? And just having to be patient. But like you're saying, I definitely think that there is some wisdom to choosing an idea that is unique, right? Or trying to make it unique, or as you're developing it, like how is this going to be different? And all of that sort of stuff. But to me, there's always that mystical side of it that's like, I don't know. I just don't have, it doesn't feel like it's ready yet. It just doesn't feel like, and there's no other reason other than it's just not ready yet, So what made Wraithwood ready?
Well, Wraithwood is interesting because it's actually the first book that I ever finished writing the full thing. I'd written, I was ridiculous in high school where I would write like 100,000 words of something and then be like, nah, I don't like it that much. And then I just leave it. And I've never returned to it.
Oh, wow.
But Wraithwood, I actually finished, I forget if it was my senior year of high school or my freshman year of college. But I actually finished it. And then immediately went on, and within the next year of my freshman year of college, wrote book 2 and 3. And then I just kind of let them sit for a while because I didn't really have the connections or know-how that I needed to actually publish them. So yeah, they sat for a couple years, and then my junior year, I ended up getting an agent. And then my senior year, they ended up getting contracted. So it was like a really long, drawn out process with like other books being written in between there, other contracts being in between as far as Dear Hero and Dear Henchman. And yeah, I graduated like a year and a half ago now. Yeah. So high school kind of sounds really far away, but it actually wasn't. It was 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, and that's so interesting because how different is it now from when you finished it, like your freshman year of, so because you've had a lot of writing experience since
Oh
then.
yeah.
That's my point. Like you've working for a publisher as an editor, you know, you have an agent, you've been in the industry more, you've written a couple books, published a couple books. You had a lot more experience. How different is the book now than it would have been if you had just put it out freshman year of college?
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad that I didn't. It Well, for one thing, my agent told me, you need to chop 13,000 words. This is too long, which I was horrified. I was like, no, they're all important. They were not all important. So I'm glad that I chopped those. A lot of things kind of got, like, this story is mostly the same, but definitely the writing style is a lot different now. Books 2 and 3 that I, like, quote unquote wrote my freshman year of college, I'm basically completely rewriting. I look back on them now and I just kind of cringe a little bit. I'm like, oh no, those are not going out into the world. So yeah, it's interesting because when you first write them, when I first wrote them, I'm like, these are wonderful. This is exactly how it should be. And now I'm like, this should not see the light of day. I've got to fix these up before sending them into the publisher.
Did you sit down and just rewrite, or did you edit a lot? Like when you had Wraithwood and you're going to send it into the publisher, because sometimes, like, if there's so much that you have to, like, deal with, I found I just have to rewrite it. I just have to just sit down and just write it all over again. Is that what you did?
With Wraithwood, there were a few parts that I just completely rewrote. And then there was just also a long chain of edits because we had a class in college that was called Manuscript to Book, and mine was one of the manuscripts that we did, and basically classmates looked over it and edited it. So it went through that, and then there was my agent telling me to change things, and then when it was on submission to publishers for a year, they had all sorts of feedback from things to, like, you know, this reads more like a middle grade than a YA, to this starts way too slow. So a lot of the beginning just got chopped and was unnecessary. Definitely, I aged up the main character by about 2 years. So it was just kind of a slow conglomeration of changes until finally it became what it is now that this publisher saw. And then, of course, there were edits after that, too. So, yeah, just a big whole snowball of a bunch of different changes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages of getting traditionally published is, while it depends on the publisher for sure, but, you know, having more people look at it who want to make it good and they're trying to help you make it good. Like, if it's a positive experience, yes, things can change, but you end up learning a lot. That's my point. That you end up really learning a lot more about your own, you know, my own writing style and what works, what doesn't work, what, you know. And the next time I do write a book, like, even the rough draft is going to be better because I'm like, I'm not going to put this crap in there because they're just going to cut it out. You know, like, it's not necessary. Like, let's get to the inciting incident sooner, or whatever the thing is that you have to learn. Not that self-published books can't be just as good, but usually you just got to pay somebody $1,000 to do that for you, or whatever it is. And so maybe not $1,000, but if that's usually about where you start. All that to say is that sounds really interesting. And like I said, I really like the name of the book. For some reason, when you first told me the name of the book, it was Wrathchild. And here's why. It's because I'm old, and it's an Iron Maiden song. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And then I looked at it again. I was like, oh no, it's not Wrathchild, it's Wraithwood. You know, because your brain's lazy, and it's just sometimes it goes places. So it's coming out July 15th.
Yes.
Yeah. Where can people get it?
It's Currently on Amazon for pre-order for both print and ebook. I don't know if it's there yet, but once it comes out, it'll be on, Barnes and Noble or Target or anywhere else that you might want to look for it. So yeah, and then if people want to go to Mountain Brook Inc., so mountainbrookink.com, you can find it there, and there's a couple different links to places you can go for it. So yeah, pretty much anywhere. And then if you want it at your library or your bookstore, you can just ask for it too, because they usually will order things that you ask for.
Yeah. And how can people get a hold of you? How can people find you? Social media, stuff like that?
Yeah, so Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, website, all of that. So Alyssa Roat sounds like a pun. So my hashtag at, I can't remember, handle. It's called a handle.
Yeah, that's a handle.
My handle is Alyssa Roat, so ALYSSAWROTE. Haha, puns. At any of those.
That's awesome. And that's your handle on both Instagram and Facebook?
Yep, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, anywhere.
Anywhere. Oh, TikTok. Do you do dances?
I have a couple videos of my cat. That's all I have on there yet.
Okay. Does your cat do dances? I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you. Well, that's awesome. Well, Alyssa, this has been great and been very helpful. We are going to be doing our own world building here very soon for our season 7. And like I said, because we are just like with You and Hope, we have to have a lot of that stuff done as we start writing, because we've got 4 authors and we're each taking turns with chapters. So we have learned the hard way to have a lot of that stuff kind of set, as we kind of write in the world. And we learned the hard way, because the first season we did not. And it was very interesting what sort of things would just sort of happen. And you're like, wait a minute, where did the tank come from? We've got tanks now, I guess. So all of that. So we're definitely going to be paying attention. And I know this just got a lot of, it's got a lot of value for people and authors, which we love to do. And this will be, so for those of you guys who have caught this, just go check out Alyssa and check out Wraithwood. And obviously, and like I said, from personal experience, just Dear Hero and Henchmen are just really fun and funny, and I really like them. And so just go check it out. And hopefully we'll see you again soon, Alyssa.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you in a month, I guess.
Yeah, true. At World Makers.
That's right. All right. God bless. See you soon.